Grant, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
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 Working again.
Meeting is in session. This is for March 9th, 7:30, we're past. We are live streaming. That means also that individuals who are watching this remotely via televideo can also send in comments or questions. And there will be appropriate times to do that in case we're flooded with calls or, questions. Okay, just a quick thing on the opening remarks that I have. Me and the town office staff, we've been realizing that not everybody is getting the emails that we put out, either through the Garrett Park website page email notices or through the GPML, the Garrett Park mail list. I want to encourage everybody, please, to sign up. You're not going to be swamped with emails. These are just town notices. It's particularly important given that we have the coronavirus going on. We also have had some misses on the recycling schedule that has changed, and people are still putting out their recycles on Monday. So I really need to plea for residents to give their email addresses to the town office so we get them into the right email services systems, email system services. Okay, that's all I have. We are going to go to the approval of the agenda. Council members, if you have any changes. Any changes to the agenda?
Nope.
No.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, everybody in favor?
Aye.
Okay, unanimous. Okay, next, at 7:40, we have the approval of minutes from the February 10th council meeting. Are there any changes or comments about the meeting minutes? Are there no comments if there are none?
I have none.
What was
No.
that,
I
Hans?
have none.
None?
I have none.
I think I'm okay. I just didn't notice this thing about the land use in before. Just read it.
Oh, good, okay.
Where's the items? On the back, town updates.
Are we talking about the land use?
Yeah, the land use one. The ADUs and the corner lots, they're not totally tied together. I suggest, can we just scratch on that, or what's the purpose of that? I wasn't here to give an update.
There's a question that was asked from
Okay.
one of our residents, and this
Okay.
was the response from council.
Okay.
So, Stephen, we have, our understanding is that you're working with the land use task force
Mhm.
on revising the zoning ordinance to be more flexible for the corner lots. And what may not be clear to any of us, I'm not sure, is
Yeah.
whether the ordinance would also include the town's position on the ADUs. That's up to you. We can
Yeah.
strike that last sentence.
I think this is fine.
Okay,
So,
good. Okay, all in favor of the minutes as they are then?
Aye.
Everybody unanimous? Okay, approved. All right, at 7:45, we're a little early, but that's okay. Are there any presentations by resident? I see.
That's not a presentation.
Okay, I see no hands, so we are going to move on to the action item. Wasn't there another action item for
Should be under action.
No problem. I think it's okay, because. Okay. Andrea, you want to talk about the possible rescheduling of the council
Yeah,
meeting?
April 13th is a day that MCPS has off, and it's the day after Easter, and not all of the council members can be there on April 13th, but all of the council members can be there on April 20th. So just wanted to confirm with you all that you're okay with moving it to April 20th, and just also bring it up at the meeting so that residents know as well.
I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, good. That will be April 20th will be the
Yeah.
next, April 20th is the next town council meeting. Unanimous. Okay. I wanted to go ahead and do this one first, but I guess we can just go with the order.
Whatever
This one's
works for you.
quicker.
Okay. Whatever,
Um,
whatever you want to do is fine.
Anybody have an issue if we do the Arboretum committee member appointments first under new business?
No?
You all right
We're
with
just
that?
waiting for the.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to just bring that up quickly. We have a vacancy as of actually March 1st. Mike Spector is stepping off after being on the Arboretum Committee for a number of years, and most recently as chair, and had really led the effort to get the comprehensive Arboretum plan completed. So he is now off, and we have a vacancy. I have met with a resident named Charlie Kaler, and he is most excellent fit with experience working around arboretums and azaleas, and also specifically, he's a professor at Temple, and he does work with GIS data as it relates to trees. So given that our comprehensive arboretum plan has a lot to do with the location of the trees and the inventory, I think he'd be a wonderful fit for the Arboretum Committee, and I'd like to appoint him with council approval.
Has Mr. Kaler been a resident in town for over a year?
Yes, he has.
Great. The only other question I had is, I was wondering if the town would consider going forward implementing some sort of advertising procedure for vacancies, because it'd be nice, I think, for people to have an opportunity. I know we don't always get volunteers, and it's great when we do get volunteers like Mr. Kaler stepping forward, so I don't want to discourage him in any way. But I think from a transparency standpoint, it would be nice if we would advertise the vacancies and give people a chance to put their names forward.
As I mentioned to you in a reply, it is the mayor's discretion to make the appointment. And as people have been aware of my practice since being mayor, I have most typically put out announcements when there's vacancies. It just so happened, and I would have done the same thing this time, but I met with Charlie, and I was pretty impressed and thought, okay, this is good. It hasn't always been done, but it is at the discretion of the mayor.
What's the harm of just having always advertised?
Well, I think if we find a good fit, I have the discretion to go ahead and do that, which is in the charter. So, before we start talking, you know, I don't want to get into all the past stuff, but yeah, that, I will generally always do that if I haven't found somebody who's already a great fit.
Well, some of the past stuff, I think, was a little bit concerning me, and I'm wondering if maybe not be happy to volunteer to lead a charge on this, maybe do something to kind of like even out the process of all of our committees, kind of,
You mean?
like there was confusion about who started when and when their term was up last
Yeah,
year.
there
and
was
a lot of
nobody
that.
really,
So I have some ideas on how to do that, so.
Yeah, we've got that improved now. We are now tracking that, and each chair of each committee is actually responsible for tracking their membership, but we have that all updated now.
I must say, I like the idea of charities. I like the idea of knowing who all, if anybody, has volunteered for what activity. so that we can, you know, if you then appoint somebody, we know who else is in the wings or might be
Yes.
out.
Right.
So I would strongly favor some kind of a process that invites volunteers to step forward for whatever committee assignment it is. So we can, so we, as a council, can know who's out there.
Yeah, I understand, and I mean, generally, that has been my practice as mayor, but it has not been a practice in the past, and it's not even written down. So you're starting with me, but you didn't ask of this in all your years as council members of the previous mayor or mayors. So I agree, transparency is best. This just happened to be a great fit. I don't think there's any issue with it, and I'd like to make the appointment, and I'm not looking to create any kind of a policy on this, because there's other transparency issues we will then need to tackle, which I don't think we really want to get into right now. But your point's well taken, and that's generally how I operate.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I just feel like it'd just be easier if we had something that was
Mhm.
pretty smooth across
yeah,
everything
this is
else.
pretty smooth,
'Cause
Stephen.
we've
I
had,
have put, in the last 2 years, I have always put out an announcement. It just so happened, this guy
Yeah.
was great.
Yeah, I remember you've done it on all the other ones.
So,
Um,
I will try to do that in the future, if, you know, as we,
mhm.
I mean, this was just so uniquely a fit, and just the timing, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
I don't think anybody has
So-
an issue with
Okay.
this one. It's just,
All right.
there have been cases in the past where somebody
Mhm.
wasn't up to 1 year. We had one, or 2 or 3 of them actually recently, maybe it's just 2, where somebody wasn't here for a year, and then we had to either find a workaround or.
Yes,
person
that was
wait.
under the previous administration. Yes, there were several appointments that were made unbeknownst until the last minute. There were not
No,
calls,
I'm
so.
talking about a different thing, that
Mhm.
somebody wasn't a resident for a full year, like the charter asked for.
Yeah,
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 so,
okay,
so
well, we
one
fixed
person,
that one.
we
Yeah.
came up with a special
that one,
odd situation.
yeah, that's
And
in
there
the
was
past.
another person who hadn't been here for a year and had to wait, and then eventually joined the committee.
Mhm.
So we just don't know, like, if
Yes.
somebody is new to the town, they're told, I've only been here 6 months, you can't join that committee yet.
Mhm.
There's no way, like, for
Mhm.
people, or is there a way for people to kind of like know, oh, yes, that person did explain,
Mhm.
or express interest back in the past?
Well, if you have any problem with this appointment, please speak
don't.
right now, because I think we're sort of beating a horse here. I'd like to
Oh.
move forward with just making this appointment with the council approval.
I think that's fine. I mean,
I have no
I
problem
think we
with
want to preserve the mayor's flexibility, particularly if there are emergency situations.
Okay.
But it's a good practice.
Yeah,
I
and
just wanted to-
generally I do follow that, as everybody knows. So is everybody in favor of appointing this individual, this resident? I heard yes,
It's fine.
yes, Hans? Okay.
It sounds okay, I just don't know that.
Well, that has happened in many issues in the past. We don't personally know the individuals who've been appointed.
Do
Thank
we-
you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Do we have that tracking sheet posted on the website then?
Yes, it is. Well, for the Arboretum Committee, it lists the years of appointments and when they expire now.
For each
Mhm.
one, we used to, for each committee that we
Mhm.
created an Excel spreadsheet. I don't know if it's still there.
We might-
Somebody has to be keeping it up to date. Each committee chair is supposed to be keeping their
Sure.
own list up to date.
I mean, we might want to do that, that'll eliminate any issues, because we'll now have a heads up based
Committee
on.
chairs also have access to the website. They can update the website pages, and I think they've all been offered training to do that, so they are empowered to do that.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Charlie Kaler is appointed to membership of the Arboretum Committee. Next on the new business, still under 8 o'clock, is the Montgomery County Code, Chapter 33B, pesticides. And if you would, Jerry Lee, take it.
All right, thank you. As we discussed last month, last year Montgomery County updated its code on use of pesticides. And because Garrett Park is an independent municipality, it's not automatically covered by this code. And if we want Garrett Park to be covered and have use of pesticides be the same in Garrett Park as it is in the rest of the county, we need to specifically pass an ordinance to opt in. Mary Travellini from the county, I forget the name of the office, is Department of Environmental Protection or Policy, thank you, is here today to give a very brief overview of what the law says and how it can apply in Garrett Park if we opt in, and to answer any questions that we might have about it. We have not yet introduced an ordinance here in Garrett Park, and we've also put this to the Arboretum Committee to offer any recommendations. But we wanted to give people an opportunity to ask questions about the law so that we could introduce an ordinance perhaps in April. Do you want to come up to the microphone? Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks. As mentioned, I'm Mary Travelini with the Department of Environmental Protection here in Montgomery County. Some of you may be familiar with how codes work in the county, and some may not. You obviously all are. Can't speak to everyone else listening here. But we have 21 independent municipalities that have the option to opt in or out of much of the county code, except for all the health codes. Those are automatically applied throughout the county. All the other codes are optional. The pesticide code's actually been around for several decades now, and it's mostly pertained in the retail space, so most residents were not able to really notice it. We were doing things like enforcing, making sure that Twinkies are not on the same shelf as rat poison, dealing with spills, required signage, relaying things to the state, requiring signage, and things like that. The way that the code has changed is it's now a restriction on the use of synthetic pesticides. How many people got a mailer that looked like this earlier in the year? So it might have ended up in your junk mail or somebody sorted it out of your thing. You'll be seeing a lot more, but we sent out a mailer to start getting people initiated to it. But of the 21 municipalities that are out there, 10 were already opted in, and so they automatically roll over with the new changes. Garrett Park happens to be one of 10 municipalities that are not opted in to that part of the county code. And what we're going around is talking to each of the municipalities that are not opted in about whether or not they wish to opt in, how it would affect the areas. None of the municipalities already opted in are considering opting out. So it's really, you wouldn't have noticed the difference if you were already opted in. Now there's debate for people about whether to opt in or not. My recommendation from the county's perspective is that most people believe that county laws in terms of environmental protection apply everywhere and don't necessarily notice the difference. They're not like, oh, I cross over a line and it's a completely different thing. You can now pour oil down the storm drain type of thing. You can't do it here, you can't do it here. So the recommendation would be that you consider strongly whether or not you would like to opt in to the code. The county provides all the education and all of the enforcement, as we do with any other codes that apply within those municipalities, including environmental codes. So there's no undue burden on the town in terms of enforcement, compliance, education, you name it. We do it all. In fact, in many ways, we're doing it to everyone. So this mailer that some people said they got, when we do mailings, outreach, et cetera, we're not discriminating on where anybody lives or works in the county. So this applies to lawns, playgrounds, private child care facilities, and mulched recreation areas. So if you happen to have a child that goes to a private facility that's not in the town, it's going to apply there. Maybe you work down at the Marriott, maybe you have a farm up county with a second home, whatever it might be, it's going to apply to people as they traverse the county. So we don't discriminate in terms of education, and we never will. What we do educate is if somebody says, does this apply in Garrett Park? Right now we can say no, it does not apply in Garrett Park. But we don't walk around saying these are the 10 places that it doesn't apply. Of the 10 places that it doesn't apply, I've spoken to more than half of them at this point, and many are considering opting in. I'm going through a process. My recommendation this time of year is that if the town does consider opting in, you can opt in at any time, but you could also say, we're opting in now, but maybe make it effective in the fall, so that if folks have contracts for contractors to do things throughout the summer season, you're giving them that window of time. If you did opt in right away, we would probably give them that window. The law went into place in June of this past year, which is a very inconvenient time if somebody is in the business of doing lawn care or landscaping. So we told most people, if you have a contract, finish your contract, just don't sign anything new for right now or the upcoming year, but we gave a little bit of a forgiveness window there. What it does allow for is you can use any organic pesticides on these surfaces, and there are exemptions. Mosquitoes are an exemption, ticks, fleas, if you're treating inside the home, if it's a pest of trees or shrubs, and you need to treat it within the lawn area. There's some noxious weeds on the list, and all of that is listed on our website if folks want to explore what are the exemptions under the law. There's certain areas that are also exempt. Golf courses are exempt, athletic fields are exempt. In terms of public schools, they're under their own state plan. They're already highly restricted in those areas. We don't have control over the public schools, and we don't have control over the county parks, although they are included partially within this law, and have their own IPM plan as well. But this is mostly applying to every other lawn, playground, multi-recreation area, and private child care facility. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has right now about it.
Mary, I have a question
Yeah.
for clarification. I just heard you say that the Department of Parks, Recreation, they have their own rules about the use of the pesticides for parks.
Montgomery Parks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we have a park in
Mhm.
town that is a county park. So
Two of them.
two of them. So are they following anything that's similar to what the 32B?
They are actually, they've taken even they have parts of, there are some things in the law that apply to them, but they are essentially self-imposing most of the law on themselves, including across most of their athletic fields. They already weren't using pesticides very much, especially athletic fields. A lot of their local parks were banned, but all their playgrounds are pesticide-free. A lot of their local parks are pesticide-free, and they also have a state-mandated IPM program as well. And they also have to post out in advance any time that they're doing an application. Yeah.
When you say pesticides, are you also including herbicides?
Yeah, so great question. I use the term pesticide. It's a broad class of all the sides, things that kill things. So fungicides, herbicides, insecticides, algicides, rodenticides, those are all pesticides. So an herbicide is a type of pesticide. Yeah.
Is there a specific category of things that you're going after or not going after in this plan?
So the way it works is that you can use any pesticide that's allowed under USDA organic standards. So anything that's used in the agricultural industry is allowed, and anything that doesn't meet those USDA organic standards or is not what's called a minimum risk pesticide by the EPA, which are products that don't require EPA labeling, those products cannot be used. And of course, we have state level restrictions of what can be sold and distributed in the state, how they must be labeled, so it has to be registered within the state as well. The big challenge for some people is that these things don't come off of retail shelves. There's requirements that will have signage at the retailers about the law, but because people might be able to use the same pesticides in sidewalk cracks or patios or garden beds, they're still sold. Yeah.
Are there special rules having to do with the watershed of a stream?
No, it applies equally within those areas. So any pesticide you use, even these organic pesticides, will have labeling of where they can be used. And if it's labeled that it cannot be used in aquatic habitats, then that's going to be a state and federal level violation. It always has been.
And who does the reinforcement, who did the enforcement of these regulations?
DEP will be doing that. So we have compliance officers who already enforce noise, air, water quality, all of our environmental laws. So it wraps right into our enforcement strategies.
What are the penalties?
It's a $50 civil fine. So the county's biggest focus will be on education, because we really need education to have people be compliant. Obviously, a $50 fine shows that it wasn't being set up as a really big penalty. It is a big change. We're the first major municipality in the United States to pass a law of this scale. So we had a big battle in the courts for several years over this, and it's a big deal. So we really realize this is a big change for everyone. So education is going to be the first mode of action before we just start going out there slapping fines on people.
Mary,
Yeah.
do you have any examples of the opt-in
I believe everyone's different in how they do their processes in terms of their ordinances. I think some, write in different ways of how we will adopt such and such code. You could probably look at your own ordinances and some of the other codes and see how that's been done in the past. If you have a town attorney who's on duty, they'll be familiar with the process, and they can, of course, contact our attorneys. But when I ask my attorney that question, they say, tell them to check with their own attorneys about how they do the opting in.
Do you have a list on your website, or is there a website that has recommendations for replacements for whatever, say grub killers, like I've got grubs?
We do. We have actually two very extensive sets of pages. One set that we've had before the law even came in, which is all about organic lawn care, and then we have an entire page about the law, and it's got all sorts of things on it, including what's allowed, what's not allowed, what are the exemptions, how does this apply, how is this protecting me, what was the reasoning behind the law. So there's a lot of things on there. In terms of the actual chemicals, so when I educate on organic lawn care, I've never included chemicals at all as part of the process, organic or not. But we do have a list that we try to sift through. So the state chemist lists are it's like 10,000 plus chemicals that are on there as pesticides. So we try our best to sift through about ones that are compliant with the law, but we don't guarantee it, but we do keep it maintained. There are no one-to-one substitutes for certain herbicides, for example. They're just not, they're not always going to be the same.
So there wouldn't be a direct, there's just a list of what's
allowed.
What's allowed.
Right.
Does it also say in that what's allowed, what it does, for example?
No, that information would probably drown people in trying to understand and interpret all of that. So if you look at any other information that's provided about products in general, you have to go then to the product and the manufacturer and their labeling of what it is effective on.
Okay, so all it lists is just a brand name or something like
It's
that?
just the brand names of the chemicals that are registered with the state that are compliant with our law. We do talk about things. If somebody were to ask me, let's say that you say, well, I have this thing that's called crabgrass killer and the chemical is, Fred 920, right? And then I have this other thing that's organic and it's John 5.6. What is the difference between those? I'm happy to talk about it, but I'm also not a chemist. And I'll read the labels and I'll listen to the professionals about what's effective, and I'll be able to convey what I've heard is that might take 2 to 3 applications. What I've heard is that it's most effective in the spring, but I'm still going to say, make sure you're following the label and look at what the manufacturers and the professionals have put out there about that.
So if I had, for a specific example, say grubs, so is there a spot I could go for a recommendation or something I could look at or point people to that would say, oh, if you've got grubs, try these things?
We have grub controls on that list, so you can certainly look at those. And again, you'll have to do a little bit more of your own research. Sometimes our county extension or state extension might have more information about those, but we're not taking on that role because we just simply don't have the capacity to be the experts at DUP on that.
Mary,
Yeah.
once we opt in, will the law apply to all properties in town regardless who owns them, including the town itself?
Great question. So I've actually had some municipalities that are already opted in come and ask me, does this apply to our own municipal lands? And the answer is, under the letter of the law, no, it does not apply on municipal lands. It applies on private land and on county land. So the municipal lands were never mentioned in the law. What I do tell folks is that most of your residents are probably expecting that you'll be compliant, and also that any government agency, how small or big, typically the residents are more likely to pressure them to do these things even if the laws are not there. But it does not apply to municipal lands, but like I said, it also doesn't apply to athletic fields, golf courses. I do get challenges of, well, it applies here, but it's not comprehensive here. And what I tell people is it's a huge baseline. There are a lot of places that are exempt. You can push further if you'd like to go to the county council for it to cover more areas. But first major municipality in the United States to enact such a law, and more than 30% of the county is covered in turf grass. So we're having a very big effect on a lot of landscapes.
And we could always put in that specific
You
language
can always put
ourselves.
that in, so if you were to say that this also applies to our county, to our town land, you can certainly write that in.
Thank you.
I'm not clear where the link is. It sounds like you're talking about certain pesticides are not allowed.
That's
for-
right.
But then I'm looking at the 33B in the county code. It looks like it's only 2 pages. I don't see a link out to where.
You actually, I can give you a link later to get in there, but it's much longer than that. Yeah,
Okay.
there's, sometimes when you Google county codes, you get into 33B and you just get the executive regulation.
Yeah,
but
it's not the whole thing.
the 33B code is actually longer than that.
Okay.
There's a question, right?
This isn't an ignorant question.
Could you come to a mic, please?
Shall I bring it to her? Or do you
That's
want
very
to
kind of you. Go right ahead.
I'm wondering why golf courses and athletic fields are exempt.
So I don't have a great answer for that. I have my best guess. I don't believe that, I wasn't around when they wrote the code or wrote the law that adopted the code. I don't believe they were considered in extreme discussion, but I can tell you my guess behind them. Because again, people are like, well, kids are all over athletic fields, right? So golf courses and athletic fields are managed very intensely because they have an intensive use of play. So it's not your typical front yard, backyard area that people typically just walk in or sit out and have a picnic on or kick the ball in every so often. So there's a management issue with them in terms of the intensive management. There's also a management issue with how they maintain them. So they're cut really short, especially golf courses, for example. They have highly managed subsoils, which are actually pretty terrible for grass. And they also have a national standard of play that they have issues with. So if Montgomery County would have probably never been able to pass this law if golf courses were included, because all of our golf courses would leave. They just, there's one successful organic golf course in the United States, I think it's on Martha's Vineyard, and it's very, very difficult for them to do it because the standard of play in the United States and the way that they manage them is very different. The other thing I also speculate about them is that they are areas that are strictly maintained only by professionals, whereas a lot of the other turf landscapes can be managed by professionals or your average homeowner alike and a variety of people. And so the amount of pesticides used, it can be extreme. You and I sometimes think like, well, more is better, and just put twice as much on. I really didn't like that weed, I'll double it up. I'll use it right before a rainstorm. Oh, I didn't realize I had to relabel. So, the list goes on. So those are just speculations of why they would not have been included, and they can always be another phase. But I can almost guarantee you that if somebody said, we're going to pass this law on golf courses, it would never pass. It just wouldn't. The economic challenges around that would be extreme.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chris?
Any other point for?
Yes, you can ask a question. Do you mind coming to a mic though, please? Sorry.
I can repeat it.
It's just mine.
You said the county.
You gotta go to the mic.
Yeah, Chris, we need you on the.
Everybody gets sitting out on time.
Yes, he has to tell us who he is.
If the town would opt in, the county would enforce
That's right.
on private property within town.
Yes,
And how is an enforcement action initiated?
that's a great question.
And
Oh,
to make
okay.
it clear, do you need a complaint or does the county initiate it on its own?
Okay. Great question. So it's typically complaint driven. Most of our environmental laws and other laws tend to be complaint driven. It doesn't mean that if we see a violation that we wouldn't enforce it, but we are not intentionally going out and patrolling neighborhoods looking for violations. We don't have the resources to do that on anything. So if a compliance officer is out responding to something else and they see something that's a violation, an overflowing grease trap, for example, they will deal with that when they see it, but otherwise it's complaint driven. Yeah.
Are road salts used in the wintertime considered a toxic substance or?
They're not, road salts are not included in the pesticide law. Unless somebody's trying to use them as a pesticide, which they shouldn't be, but we would pass that on to the state. Well, I'm available for any questions, further questions. If the community has questions afterwards that you need to follow through with myself. As I mentioned, our website is very extensive about the law, so most information tends to be there, but people can certainly contact us directly. All right.
Thank you, Mary, and I think if people do have any questions, Jerry Lee is leading the effort for the council. It's always good to reach out to her too. She may already have an answer, or she can expedite a response between Mary and the residents.
And I brought a bunch of these in case anybody needs some. I've got them right up here with me. Thank you.
All right, thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you. Okay. Okay, we are at 8:20. It's 8:10, but we're at the town updates at 8:20. And I will start with the Safe Routes to School project. Hopefully, some of you have already seen the letter from the mayor in the Bugle that has just come out this week? Last week? Okay. Went to great lengths to explain some of the things that were happening, what we've been finding that we hadn't anticipated and having to resolve. We are now told that tomorrow, weather permitting, I know there might be some rain, but it might be more like spitting rain, that we will have the concrete poured for the sidewalks starting tomorrow. And that will be for at least the first block on Oxford, between Weymouth and Keswick. The plan that I was just told today is that they really are going to try to finish that whole block. And then next week, they're going to do the excavation for the rest of Oxford. So we're looking at possibly, another, including the time for concrete to cure. And we have cylinder breaks, if you all know what that means, about the strength of the concrete. We have those scheduled for 7-day, 14, and for 21-day. So we're looking at, for people, pedestrians, we need at least a 2,500 PSI. For vehicles, we were looking for at least 3,500. There's a chance, where I'm going with this, that we may be able to be walking on these sidewalks within a week. That's a 7-day cylinder break, if that brings out 2,500. We will find out. But overall, I would expect at least 2 to 4 weeks before Oxford is done and usable for sidewalks, the aprons for the driveways, as well as the sidewalk that cuts through the driveway. That's also part of the 3,500 PSI. Anyway, that's where we are. I would like to make one mention because there were a few residents who noted this. The very first concrete curbs that were poured on Weymouth, starting at Keswick and heading east, sort of down the hill towards Weymouth, were originally poured as vertical curb, which is incorrect. It was not done according to the specifications in the design plans. We had them fix it. They tried fixing it by only rolling the very top of the curb. It is supposed to be a fully rolled curb. So their first attempt at fixing was only a rolled top, which was still not good enough. And then we had the District 3 engineers come out, and they, so this was between a Friday, the weekend, and then a Monday. And that was this past, it was a week ago Monday. They had them rip up the concrete and that was about 92 feet, and redo it as a rolled curve. So while there was some push and pull on who's paying for that, one little thing we found out that was not ever specified in the field inspector's contract was concrete testing equipment. Very specifically, it was not, it would have had to have been called out, it was not, but we needed it, and that's to test the slump, and it's to test the ratio of air to aggregate within the concrete, so it's about $1,000, pretty expensive equipment, and it has to be calibrated. So SHA agreed with us to go ahead and reimburse the concrete company for them to go buy this concrete testing equipment. Field inspector would be accountable for doing the testing with that equipment, and we would reimburse the concrete company with the equivalent of the linear feet that the equipment cost. So in effect, while there was 92 feet of concrete ripped up, roughly 38 feet we are reimbursing for because it covers the equivalent cost of that equipment. The other 54 feet is going to have to be eaten or taken by the concrete company. Just a little fact, all these little things I'm learning. So that's how we're dealing with that.
At the end of the day, do we end up owning the equipment?
And at the end of the day, we own it. If we want them to keep it, it would be like paying them, reimbursing them twice.
Right, okay.
That's okay. So that's where we are. I'm looking forward to seeing something happen tomorrow. That's all I have. All right, shall we go with the next item, almost at 8:20? It's the Mayor's Stormwater Management Task Force report and recommendations. I've asked Chuck Berry, who is the chair of that task force, to give us a sort of a overview presentation of where we are with that.
Yes, good evening, Chuck Garrett, Berkeley Avenue. I'm just going to start with what the task force has been doing for the last, at least half a year, or since last summer, and then provide the recommendations. Jason Ozier from Ozier Clark last summer provided to the town 2 drainage studies, one for Claremont Avenue and one for the Rokeby Avenue area down at the end of Rokeby where it's adjacent to the subdivision next door, Garrett Park Estate subdivision. So I'm going to start with Claremont. We had 4 meetings. So Jason Ozier gave a presentation here at Town Hall last summer. We had a meeting at John Osick's property over in Claremont. We had then another meeting here with the task force in the fall and residents. And we had a meeting at Rokeby Avenue in January with a pretty sizable group, a lot of task force members, 2 council members, and a lot of the residents in the area. Can you hear Elizabeth?
No, I can't.
Oh, I need to speak closer. Wow, I can hear myself. Okay, so let me start with Claremont. The Claremont study, it had a drainage area map. I know a lot of you can't see it, so let me just briefly describe it. John Osick's property is here, where apparently the reason that a study was done, and by the way, this is the second study. There was a study done by an engineering firm I think in 2004, so we paid for 2 studies in this area. And the premise of the study, or the need for the study, apparently was because water had backed up at Claremont across from Wells Park. And as oral history has it,
Porcupine
Woods. I live across from Wells Park, that's maybe why I said something Wells Park. As oral history has it, no written documents, apparently. George Miller did a good job of looking in the archives for, what has happened there in the past. So, other than apparently one or two times where it blocked up because a yard inlet there was blocked with debris, there's no other issues apparently with the storm drain piping in this area and the piping that goes under the road. There is some erosion on the other side in Porcupine Woods, but that's going to be handled by the end walls for the sidewalk project. So, Jason Ozier and Clark did a study here, and they determined that the pipe size under the road should be increased. My point was, my personal point, and ultimately the task force found this as well, if it ain't broke, why are we going to fix it? We have over a half a century of that data that says that piping there works. So again, his study, Jason Ozier's study, Clark Ozier's study, says to replace the pipe under Claremont and the end walls in Porcupine Woods and the head wall in front of John Osick's property. The other option was, instead of installing a new head wall there, was to have a larger yard inlet there. Right, the yard inlet that's there now is essentially handmade. It's not a typical structure that would have been purchased in the past. It was built a brick structure. And so he provided two options. Most of the option work is the same, replacing the pipe under Claremont and the end wall in Porcupine Woods. But the difference in the two options is either a head wall on John Osick's property or a yard inlet. My personal opinion, and based on my experience, because I've worked for two land engineering firms in 1980s and 1990s, was yes, I would have agreed to do the study the way he did it. He used TR55 modeling. I did the same type of modeling. It's a very good study. And if it had been a new subdivision, I would agree that that's the way the piping should be done, with a larger pipe. But again, we have over a half a century of data that says it ain't broke. Why fix it? When we were meeting with John Osick, he pointed out to us the existing 21-inch RCP, reinforced concrete pipe, is right up against his house, literally within about 2 or 3 feet from his house. So my personal opinion, and ultimately the task force unanimous consensus and the resident there, for the scope of work to proceed with, is to put a new pipe away from his house, and we need a new structure over by the sidewalk. And he estimates, Jason Ozier sent an update today, he estimated that work would be between $42,000 and $47,000. Much significantly less than the piping, the estimate he had in the report of about $250,000. I'm rounding it off. One was, both of these reports, the estimate for the work was, around $250,000. Both of them together was over $500,000. That's what got my attention, because I was like, where's the big need? So,
Chuck, are you moving the 21-inch concrete pipe? Or
good
are you
question,
leaving
because
that?
that's what the next sketch I just brought up. So in 2004, yes, October 2004, an engineering firm, it might have been I forget the name of the previous one that we had here. But anyway, it was a different land development, land engineering firm, okay? And they showed a new pipe picking up the yard inlet in his backyard, replacing that inlet, and veering away from his house to build a structure, and then tying into an existing structure. That needs to be worked out exactly, get some surveying, see how the grades work with any new piping and new inlets over there. But it does show the 21-inch way up close to his house. And so if we ever had to replace that pipe because it breaks, my personal opinion is let's move it away in case it breaks, so we're not up against his foundation and doing work up against his foundation.
So we
So-
would remove that concrete pipe.
Well, either,
We wouldn't
we
use
wouldn't
it,
remove
but
it,
we
we'd
would
either
remove it.
fill it with flowable
That's-
material or plug it up at the yard inlet. Because his foundation drains might be tied into there as well, so that needs to be determined. I think it was filmed at one point, because I did see some video when Ted Pratt was here, so we could check that. But at a minimum, it should be plugged to prevent any water infiltration into there. So not only that was that my opinion, but that was the consensus of the entire task force and the residents that was there to do this roughly 50, and by the way, the engineer that did this study as well estimated that the work would be $50,000. Now that was in 2004. So with escalation costs, it should have gone up, but with today's prices, even Jason Algier, what he sent today, said it should be in the range of $42,000 to $47,000 construction costs. So that's our recommendation, the task force recommendation, with John King, Dick Pratt, Donna Calajohn. She got the meeting minutes. She wasn't able to attend the meetings, all the meetings, maybe any meetings. And one other person. I guess George Miller was our ad hoc task force committee member. He was very helpful. He was on the maintenance staff here and the town residents. He dug into the archives. He, got on over at Rokeby, he popped a storm drain structure lid and really gets into the details. I was happy to have George join us in the discussions.
Dick Pratt too.
And Dick Pratt was, yes, he's been at, I think, all the meetings as well. So that's the unanimous consensus of the task force on how to proceed over in that area.
Question. So the 2004, were they talking about two different legs? So replacing the pipe along kind of like down the driveway and then turning and then having two different inlets, or is it like how is it different than the current plan or not?
It's different because the current plan doesn't do anything. The current plan doesn't address at all the pipe, the current two options that Jason Algier presented. Doesn't
I mean,
do
is
anything
update.
with the pipe.
I mean, is
By his house. So the one in 2004, the plan that we support is to do something similar to what this sketch shows from 2004. Now, we'll get the surveying and figure out the grades and see exactly where it goes. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be 2 structures or 3 structures. Those details can be worked out.
And what I'm getting at is that could explain the difference why that was maybe $50,000 back then. It probably could cost a little bit more if you have extra pieces to it now versus what his update said.
Jason doesn't he didn't show in this one-page summary that he gave us today, but essentially what he wrote up was this concept here, to move the pipe away from the house, and the details, exact details, design details will be worked out.
I'm glad to see this.
But he has seen this before.
I can shed some light on this. When we had this, the resident there was adamantly opposed to having the town work there and insisted that any work would have to be done by hand spades as opposed to small equipment. And one of the big changes.
The previous owner, yeah.
And one of the big, and so the study was never completed because he essentially told us to get off his land and he wouldn't give us access. And then the second part of it is that with the development of most of the small equipment that's available now, it's much easier and much faster to do nimble work around the foundation of a house in a place like that. And I think that essentially that is the biggest cost driver, the difference in the cost drivers.
It sounds like this one may make sense to just go ahead and leave that pipe there anyway. Because it looked like what happened is they had the original Chevy house and the pipe was probably there, and then at some point somebody built that addition and built it really close to it. May or may not have known that pipe was there. I was kind of surprised that pipe was that close, because at the time, the task force was planning to do absolutely nothing at Claremont, and I went and met with John, and I think everybody else was great. Everybody else kind of came and joined in, and then it changed to that plan. We didn't realize that pipe was that close, and it just made...
John Listig said recently, a land survey he had when he bought the house, and the right-of-way showed further away. So
Yeah.
that right of way is not correct, but what.
In the front, or?
What we saw out in the field with the pipe being that close to the house is obviously where it is.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chuck.
Hey, question for you. For argument's sake, what size pipe was Jason Lazier planning to put under the street if you went that way?
Initially, I think it was going from a 21-inch to a 30-inch. However, I pointed out that he didn't include the piping in his study. Once he added the piping, it increased the existing storm drain piping. He said, I don't have those plans. I said, well, we know it's there. So he estimated some numbers and then increased it to like a 36-inch pipe. But again, if it ain't broke, let's not fix it.
Yeah. It seems like with this, if it does turn out that that pipe is a problem 20 years down the road, it sounds like that could be done
Right.
later on.
Right, and he was arguing, the pipe is flat, and I said, if it ain't broke, we're not gonna fix it.
Yeah.
We have piping from up in the drainage area at water slope, and it's coming down, we have water coming down, it does flush through.
It's gonna go.
The breeze on the pipe. Plus, I've crawled up into the pipe, and there's no breakages up there, but there's not a lot of, that one time I crawled up, there's no debris up there.
I think George also commented that there was good flow coming, you know, even during the storm, during rainstorms, that there's no water sitting or struggling out. I mean, it's just coming right out. And it wasn't even half full, if I remember right.
Right. Correct.
Chuck, I'm sorry, in terms of the history there, what was the problem then that caused the study of this area?
For, apparently back 10, 15 years ago, the neighbor complained that the water had ponded up in the front right corner of his house. However, apparently it was found that he put debris down there, grass clippings or something, or in that area, and that was clogging up the yard inlet that's there. And as far as I know, that oral history shows that it was only in a short period of time that there was an issue there and never ponded up. So that's the only thing I know. Hans, I think, has a little bit of
The reality is
history
that,
on it.
the reality is that there were 2 major flooding incidences of where he flooded his basement, and he was really upset about that. What caused it is not real clear. And Chuck says there was evidence of grasping, and I don't know whether that was done by, whether that was discovered by the town or whether that was discovered by, but the reality is there was flooding caused by some event, and that's what drove the town to say, we need to figure out how to solve this problem.
Since that time, we've had very large storms, and it hasn't ponded up in that area. We haven't had any complaints from the neighbors.
So there's no indication that the pipe underneath the road relates to that ponding
Correct.
issue?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And
Can we?
move on to
Yeah.
Brokody.
Yeah, let's hear about that. Yes, Chris, go ahead. Do you need a,
No, I think, for the benefit of people. who don't-
okay, we're getting us hand
want Sean?
signals?
Yep.
For the benefit of people who are not tuned to identifying locations by the name of owners, this is 109-301.
Yes.
And the pipe under the road is currently what the diameter? 24. And what is the outfall also 24, or is it larger?
It's a continuation.
What is the recommended increase in the pipe under the road?
It's 30.
I think it's 6 inches.
Initially,
That's fine. The pipe under the road carries water not just from the inlet at 10930, but also other sources, including the 2 road storm drains. Is that correct?
yes,
Into which one of those road storm drains, not the drain on its own property, but the road storm drain, the previous owner emptied lawn covers. Just take my word for it. And so at first there was backup into the inlet on his own.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Well, a good point. I mean, it may not have been just grass clippings at that inlet. It may have been in that drainage piping system in that general area. Someone was putting it in the
It
curb.
all goes into the same pipe.
Right.
Okay. One last question. Does the town currently have an easement over the area at 10930 that would be necessary to accomplish any of this work?
No, and that's part of the scope of work that Jason Azier would do. He would get the meets and bounds information to provide the right-of-way sketch, and then that's incorporated in the drawing, and sometimes they go to the lawyers, and then both parties sign them. So in case you ever need to get back in there, you have an easement to do so.
Andrea's working on that.
One part of this we didn't mention, I think, was that it's not as though it's tearing apart a lawn that's already done. It's already a site under construction, so it's opportune timing he has a temporary driveway to be able to move that piping over, and he was amenable to doing
And
it.
that's the first part of what you said.
Oh, it's not-
He's done the work
the-
yet.
No, he's doing the work now, but where the pipe was talked about being moved over is a temporary driveway location now, so it's not as though it's tearing out a completely new driveway or a good driveway, so it kind of is opportune with,
Right. Yeah, I
longer
mean,
term.
for that sake, I mean, he's gonna wanna finish that area. It would be prudent, in my opinion, to, expedite this along and move this along, at least this part.
And the homeowner has offered, doesn't want to delay the construction indefinitely, but if it means leaving the
Right.
pipe exposed or helping expose the pipe for a matter of weeks, he's willing to do that. He's
Okay.
been very willing to work with us on this, so.
Question for you. So in the study, the first study that Jason Azar came up with, you looking at going to a 36-inch pipe compared to the current 24-inch pipe.
No, he was looking to go to like a 30, two pipe sizes, a 30 inch. Once
Oh,
he
30.
added
24 to 30.
the other existing piping up the drainage area to his calculations, he increased it to like a 36-inch pipe. But again, that's academic, and we have existing history of the thing working, other than when grass clippings are put into inlets apparently.
I just wonder where he came up with his numbers, given the fact that,
Well, I mean, I would have done the same thing, and there's factor of safety is built into the, that, I mean, it's not really safety, but that's the term of art that's used.
Yeah.
You get more conservative in case we get a
100-year-old storm.
1,000-year storm, or 2,000-year storm or something, I don't know. All right,
All right.
Yeah,
Talks
no,
about
that's fine.
Roku. Go ahead.
so move on to rugby. So with Rokeby Avenue, not as much sketches with that, so I'll just describe the situation there. So 10, 15 years ago, probably 15 years ago, at Donna Calajohn's property on Kenilworth, about 3 or 4 houses up from the bike path and pedestrian path that leads from the town to the adjacent subdivision at the end of Rokeby. Some piping was put, a lot of piping, large-scale piping was put in her backyard. That was a large project. And apparently, due to that project, it sped the water up, which when you start putting water in pipe, it does speed it up instead of in the large grass swale that was there. So that engineer, in fairness to him, we might have done the same thing when I worked with land development firms. They did not anticipate, it appears to me, that it would cause erosion further down the dry swale that's there, which is now the Canetti's property and the Heinzen's property. So that's caused some significant erosion, especially where their two property lines meet. Now, Jason Azier recommended having a large swale carved out, take the existing swale, I guess you'd have to carve it out more, take down trees, and put in riprap all the way from her property, and I believe all the way down to the train track, or at least to the bike path, I can't remember now. So, or piping that area as well. But But again, a lot, the industry more recently is getting away from piping stormwater and having it in grass swales to promote water infiltration. That was their recommendation. Again, it was on a magnitude of $200,000 to do that. People envision that project being like what happened at Holy Cross here recently, across from Holy Cross Church and School, that large construction project over there that went on for over a half a year. And we would have to take down trees or do deforestation in there. And the majority, I think all the residents in that area were not in favor of that. What the committee and the task force, the unanimous consensus of the task force and the neighbors, I believe, and the two neighbors are here, they welcome to have changed their mind and correct me if I'm wrong, but is to put in some spot erosion control at the areas where it really needs it. Okay? With riprap, yes, with riprap. So, and then that was what drove this recent study, I believe, the erosion on the residence area. Plus, water was backing up at just upstream of the bike path and getting close to the neighbor's basement areaway stairwell. Vasquez, I think is her name, and possibly up into Kennedy's property as well. However, it does appear, since the county fixed the break in the pipe that was there under the bike path, it does appear that that's helped the water flow more freely through the pipe. And since the large rains we've had since that time, the water has not backed up there. I don't know that we've had large enough storms to tell for sure whether it's going to back up or not. But certainly, when you have a break in a pipe, it causes eddies and turbulence in a pipe, and it does not allow water to freely flow through a pipe. The other issue is, once the water gets through the pipe, there's a swale that goes into about 20, 30 feet away into an existing county structure, and the water is actually, on heavy rains, water actually comes out of the pipe that our water typically goes into, because there's such large volumes of water coming into that collection structure from the estates that it appears water is being forced out of that structure instead of most of it going down the pipe that leads to the structure of the train track. I know I'm saying a lot of details that people don't probably not following, but those who know the issue, I hope are following along with what I'm saying.
I also just wanted to add, when the county fixed the pipe under the bike path, because they had to fix the broken pipe as well as the bike path itself, they also put in a new head wall, and they also, on the downside, the downstream side of the bike path, they put in a new head wall, all that's new, and a whole bunch of riprap on that side, as well as immediately upstream, which would have been around sort of the bend there, just before Vasquez's property on the state side.
Right.
So that all helped the conditions.
Right. So if water still ponds up, just upstream of the bike path, it's my personal opinion, and based on my experience working with land engineering firms, and looking at the area, looking at the plans, and seeing how the water from the adjacent subdivision is interacting with our water just downstream of the bike path, it's my opinion that the county's water is also impacting the water from freely flowing through the pipe under the bike path. So that's why the town wants to meet with Montgomery County to share this with them and ask them what they're going to do to fix their water impacting the free flow of our water. Because it is flowing out of that junction box, and it's impeding the water from, again, I'm repeating myself, flowing freely through the bike path. However, returning to back upstream, while some of the other residents are here, the unanimous consensus of the task force and the residents in that area is to not deforest that whole dry drainage swale, typically dry, and put in the massive amount of riprap that Jason Ozier recommended, and instead to do the spot select locations to control the erosion. And to be fair about it, if we need to come back and put in a little bit more later on, we can do that. So that's the please, Heinsohn's or Kennedys, tell me if you had any other thoughts. And you have to come up to the microphone.
Name and address.
Serial number.
Just street.
I'm Bob Heinsohn, 114054, we used to be across the street. Chuck, what you described is exactly how I remember the discussion, and that was something that we were in favor of. So this idea of the spot riprap at a few places where the erosion was prone, and then it would stop the erosion, and it would also create some baffling to slow the flow of the water. In the attachment that we were sent today with the email that showed an additional feature that we weren't prepared for, and that was that green matting that was described as something that would go down the, how was it described, the throughway or the straightaway? Which is absolutely hideous, and will, you know, again, I said this at the last meeting that I attended. I bought that property because of the forest in the backyard. It was the natural, the whole natural environment, and that feature would destroy that, and I am not in favor of that and would not allow that to proceed. So, and I think that is different from what you were describing.
That is
and what we
different.
were.
So
That's
let me,
my strong opinion.
that was new to me today, Bob, and let me share with you what that might be. It might be some temporary erosion, matting, because they also mentioned seed, grass seed in there, or seed. It might be there temporarily to hold the seed down. And I don't, if he said the entire length of it, I didn't see that. He might have said it in there. But also, one other feature with what we were talking about was to straighten out the swale right on Kennedy's property, right before it gets to the bike path. So possibly he was introducing that to stabilize the side banks of that area, in that area where the grass is. Oh, I saw the picture of it, Bob. But I know, I've seen, I agree with you, it would be hideous to look at. It looks so industrial and
It's I-99.
yes.
We'll follow up with
Yeah,
that.
but so those details are to be worked out. That's the first time we're seeing it as well. And
I agree, it looks hideous. Will we be able to get a copy of these materials for the council?
yeah, the studies, yeah.
Is that?
I nominate Andrea to send them out to you.
Okay, we got another question from the floor.
I want to respond to the statement, the details will be worked out. Our experience with this process is that the first time we were really misled about what was going to happen and what the outcome would be. So I am extraordinarily skeptical and will not allow anything to go forward until the details are completely worked out and are according, and that we understand them completely and can visualize what's done. So again, I want to state that very clearly.
Nothing will be done, Bob or Kennedy and Neil and Ruth, without at least you guys weighing in. So not.
And Bob, if that was when I was a task force member, I'm sorry if we didn't include you on something, but if it was before then, it was before my time, so.
No, this is not you.
This was years ago?
When they, in 2014, when the structure was.
I'll read, okay.
No, it's good history if you're like.
I think it's important to capture this history. I
This,
hope it will capture it.
The agreement had been made before we bought the house in 2010. The structure was built in 2014. All of the piping, everything under Donna's property. And what we were told was going to go on in our backyard and in Kennedy's backyard didn't happen. It kind of stopped. We got some riprap and a lot of netting, and it stopped, and the water just, it seemed like it just, they didn't do anything beyond there. There was no planting done, no things that they had told us would happen back there. So I tried to make the best of bad situation, and I don't want to see all of that work get destroyed, because I think we can, if we do it a smart way with the riprap, it can be done. But this was just 2014 that was put in, so that's how quickly this went from bad to really bad. So, we're not talking about years ago, we're talking about in the last, 6 years.
Oh, was it?
That it's 6 years.
On
That
Donna's
structure-
property, it was 6 years ago?
6 years ago, that went in my backyard 6 years ago. So this is, happening pretty fast, so
Okay.
just say that.
Yeah, and I think a right-of-way was produced at that time on your all's property. And I don't know if we need to revise that, especially on your property, but we can look at that to see, once the engineer comes up with some more concept drawings of what needs to be done, we can share those details with you and look at whether the easement needs to be redone.
So Chuck, has the town engineer then provided a design based on the committee, the task force's recommendation yet, or is that yet still to be done? Or are we
Well,
actually through that process?
I'll back up. It was a reverse of that how originally started. The study was done, then the task force was made, developed, or was created. And then Jason is to come up with some 50% design drawings, my term. He didn't use that term, but when you do the task, that's my recommendation. To come up with concept drawings. Don't do the final 100% drawings, and we have to redo them again. So come up with like 50% drawings, concept drawings, some people call them, and then we can share them with people.
And then, so the recommendation would be to go all the way from that head wall that comes out of the pipe that she's just describing all the way down to CSX?
No, that's a different story. That's where we need to get with the county. In my personal opinion, they need to fix their work. They have, that's the county's pipes, not the
County
town
has
pipes.
easement.
They have large easements there. Most of their water, as George Miller found, if we're looking at the piping system over there,
Yeah,
a large amount of that water, a large amount of the subdivision on that side over there comes into that one junction box. It's not a yard inlet, it's not a curb inlet. It's purely a junction box with pipes coming in and one pipe going out. So, and it's the one pipe that, again, it's lower too, where our water is supposed to come in. And George speculated, and I agree with him, it's lower and water's dumping in there from the adjacent subdivision. And before it has a chance to fully go through the pipe down the train track, it's squirting out into our, the swale where our water is. So anyway, I hope to answer your question. The proposed work here is upstream of the bike path to prevent erosion, which was the driver for the study initially. How do we prevent erosion and address the residents' legitimate complaints? As the more we looked into this, George found some good information. That pipe was repaired. We find it's just downstream of there. That water appears to not be able to flow freely under the pipe under the bike path because of the water that builds up downstream from the county, a lot of the county water.
Yeah, I remember looking at that with you and George out there on the site, and it was great that you found that where that pipe was kind of backing up, but my understanding of the original study was it was reaction to, there was the really bad storm, I can't remember, you probably remember the date, but that made a really big pond down there and busted out the causeway with the bridge and everything else, so the initial thought for that study, my understanding was to solve that problem, so I think we had like two problems we were looking at on the site. One is from the head wall erosion all the way down that way because the water comes through faster, but then the other one is when you get that bottleneck, whether it was, I guess it was assumed it was being caused by the causeway, but it's turning out it's probably more from that other pipe junction. But I think it's imperative we need to solve it from the head wall at the top all the way down to CSX, and if that means expediting the county things, I think we'll have the same exact thing if we have a storm.
I think that water ponding up, just upstream, was possibly due to the pipe break. Again, you get.
There hasn't been any ponding since.
And that's why it's called khaki, that there hasn't been there. But I don't know that we've had enough large storms to determine whether that ponding issue has gone away. But it's clear that the water, just downstream of there in that embankment, in that swell, fills up, and that's that's definitely slowing the water up from flowing through the pipe freely. And that water downstream is building up there because of the county water from the adjacent subdivision.
Yeah.
So the plan is to get with the county to say, you guys need to fix your problem, because it's apparently making problems, climbing upstream, causing a homeowner in the state subdivision to possibly get water in their basement, because the floods are pretty high. So they have, the county, in my opinion, has some responsibility to address this.
I need to interrupt for a second here, Chuck, because I want to get everybody straight on this. It is not ponding upstream of the bike path any longer. Since the bike path and the pipe under it had been repaired, the riprap was put in place both upstream and downstream of the bike path. There's not the problem there. Where it is where you and George observed that big stormwater underground culvert reversing flow, impeding town water coming through the bike path pipe to get in. It's impeding that. So what's happened, and we have a recent video from Josh Simon, where all the water is just going right down between he and Bridget Silverman's property. And as Josh says, there is, and Vasquez says, there's no problem on the upstream side, and there's actually no problem with the water finding its way to the train track, because the water is going to go there. It's the train track culvert, the big junction box, like 5 by 6. It is the lowest point, as you know, in the whole area, topographically. It's the lowest point. So the water's finding its way. It's just not finding its way the right way. There is a 36-inch pipe at the junction box underground up by Josh Simon's driveway, which collects all the water from the county, from the estate's side of the state side. It all collects there. There's a 36-inch pipe that goes from that underground junction under Josh's property to the big junction box by the train. That also is overwhelmed.
Right.
And so what we're interested in hearing from the county is how they can deal with those 2 junction boxes. But the issue isn't really any ponding.
You just explained exactly what I was saying, that was the issue, is
Yeah.
can you get it from wherever it's ponding up back there, which we think is that pipe, all the way down to the CSX? I don't understand.
What pipe are you referring to? I thought you were talking about
The one that
Don
George
Colagione.
was looking, no, the one that
Oh.
George was looking into. I was saying that's one issue. Issue 1 is the water coming out from Calagion's. And then
Yeah.
issue 2 was
Yes.
where it's backing up, and it was ponding all the way down to CSX, which we think was not because of the bridge, but
Right.
everybody assumed it was because of the bridge, but it's found it's probably,
The
or maybe
junction
not,
box.
totally determined that it's from that pipe trying to widen into another pipe and being backed up, so.
And-
Well, I think what Kathy was initially trying to share is her feeling that since the pipe under the bike path was fixed,
Mhm.
that it's not ponding upstream.
Right.
I hope that's the case. I don't know that we've had a significant enough rainfalls.
The neighbors
Determine
have
that.
said that, so.
I know that.
But if-
It's only been a short period of time. However, it is certain that water just downstream of there is being blocked, that water from the adjacent subdivision is blocking our water. There was 2 reasons, in my opinion, why it was being not able to flow freely through the pipe under the bike path. The break in the pipe, which is fixed, and the water from the adjacent estate subdivision, which, when the water comes out of the pipe under the bike path, it's not able to flow freely because there's so much water there from the adjacent estate subdivision.
And there might have even been a third thing. When we were out there that day, there was a ton of debris that looked like it had been recently cleared from CSX, so it could have been
Yeah.
a bunch of things doing it.
So I think we'll know more about that area once we meet with the county.
Now, is
But I think we have a very viable project to address the residents' needs upstream of there. And again, I want to repeat that and stress it was the consensus of the task force and the consensus of the residents on what to do upstream of the bike path.
has anybody looked then at the capacity of the CSX pipe? Is that big enough?
It's a 5 by 6 culvert that was there when the train track was installed.
And
The
it has,
county can look at that, but the point is, if it should be, the majority of the water coming to that culvert is from the county, and that's what we could discuss with the county. I did interestingly see on a set of old plans, it said some sediment was in there. And you don't usually see that drawn on a profile. But if need be, if the water's backing up that pipe all the way up to the next junction box near the bike path, the county needs to look into that.
So, Phil, there are two 36-inch pipes hitting that junction box by the railroad tracks. One is coming underground under Josh Simon's property. There actually is another 36-inch pipe coming from the estates that is up on, I don't know what you call it. It's sort of behind it, yeah. Yeah, and that's coming, so that's behind the houses, coming from the higher elevation. Yeah, the cul-de-sac, all that is coming down another pipe, 36-inch pipe, and they're hitting that junction box. And so, of course, when our water is getting impeded at Josh's junction box, then it's all flowing also down between their properties, the Silvermans and Josh's. So now you got a convergence of three different entrance points for that junction box.
And then funding-wise, the task force felt like, okay, instead of spending a couple $100,000 in that area that Jason and Azir Park recommended, the task force said, okay, we felt like $50,000 worth of work to address the spot location of erosion control. Jason came back today and estimated it around $75,000. It's in that range, okay? So if going from now, sort of to sum up the two projects, in my opinion, I was glad to be asked to work on this project because, again, when I saw this over $500,000, I was like, whoa, what are we doing there? You know, because it didn't feel like we had that significant issues other than the erosion in the area. So I'm personally happy that it's down to what I think is a reasonable amount of cost between these two projects. And I recommend you proceed with these two projects, is my personal recommendation, not the task force chairman recommendation. But I recommend you proceed with these projects. I think they're prudent and viable projects. And because we've been working on this since last summer, it's been going on for years. I don't know that we need to spend a lot more time hashing over this. I mean, Dick Pratt was on the committee, John King, Donna Calajon, George Miller, the residents. There's been a lot of good effort from the citizens in the town here to come up with this recommendation. Obviously, you guys are welcome to change it, do more study, do something different, take more time. But again, my personal opinion is we have two very viable projects here, and let's proceed.
So you said today from the engineer, a cost estimate for the riprap project on the south side?
He did a swag, just a rough estimate of $75,000.
But it's not
versus the 50 that the task force felt was a reasonable dollar amount to come to the work to do there.
But it's not like a design. Would there need to be a design?
Yeah, it would be good because the construction contractor, give them some information. But personally, I felt, and the task force agreed with this, we don't need a big surveying effort in there. Now when we meet with the county, we can talk about permits and such like that, what we need for that, if we need any permits in there. Because to me, this is a maintenance project. We're getting in there to maintain the swale that's there and prevent more erosion.
We're not looking at both at the same time. We're dealing with the upstream problem, and the county, when we talk with them, sure.
No, when I said both projects, I meant Claremont.
Okay, gotcha. But you said county, so I didn't know what you meant, sorry.
Did I say county?
I think he was referring to the permitting though for the.
Yeah, then
But
I linked to permitting. I said, when we meet with them on this other area, we can share with them what we're planning to do upstream, and also if they thought we needed any permits. So what I'm getting at is the budget and the cost for this. So if there is some permitting, that's another $3,000, $5,000, $4,000, whatever it is. Sometimes you have to do fee contributions to the county for stormwater management that our taxes already pay for, but we don't get anything back from the county. But that's another issue.
So as part of his cost estimate, he wasn't necessarily providing any assurances that this riprap project would be effective, because it's not a concept design.
No, he agreed the goal is for erosion control, and he's gonna do things that any typical engineering firm would do to prevent erosion, which is the driver for the project, if I'm understanding your question correctly.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, because I haven't seen whatever he produced. I just wanted to understand what he's provided, and is it just a cost estimate, not yet with a concept design or any kind of engineering assurances?
As I understand it, he would come up with a design for a couple of thousands. It's not that, personally, it's not that, it's reasonable prices for what he's done. These two studies, he told me, were like $1,500 each, which is extremely reasonable. We used to charge a lot more than that
It's cheap.
25 years ago. Anyway, so I think his prices are reasonable, and I think, he's, he would take existing topographic survey and show on there where to put the spot riprap, and maybe add some details to that.
And that's,
Because I don't think we need a full-blown
right.
design, surveying and all that like they sometimes do.
So
Yeah.
either.
That
And it's
goes-
just for the, purposes of being able to actually write up an invitation for bids, so we have something to
Something to
work
go
with.
on.
It doesn't have to be that level of the
Yeah.
detail.
Versus Claremont, where we do need surveying, and we do need the technical design drawings that we would get, that then become 100% construction drawings.
Something, just as an aside, something that Jared Lee and I were discussing, we were out there sitting on the culvert out by CSX, is it'd be nice if it kept some natural look to it, versus making it look super engineered. Like there's a riprap channel that runs from the end of Weymouth all the way down into Rock Creek next to the bridge on Knowles Avenue. It just looks very much like they brought in a dump truck of blue regular sized stones and did it. And I noticed in Rock Creek Park.
I'm sorry, you're talking between a bike path and a train track, right?
No, I'm talking about from anywhere where there's riprapping or erosion control going in. And I noticed in Rock Creek Park there's some, and I think this aligns kind of what, when I talked to Mrs. Silverman about it, she kind of liked this idea. If it looked kind of natural, they were fine with doing this all the way down to CSX where it looks like a natural stream. So this is obviously something that was done by the county in Rock Creek Park. It just goes next to the playground on the other side.
That's a good point. If they can use stone that looks more like that than the typical blue stone
Yeah.
that you see, the large ones, that's much more desirable. And Jason mentioned that he had done some work recently, and I don't know if it was there, but if he did that work, that's good. If he could specify that same stone, see.
Yeah, I mean, I think it exists a lot throughout Rock Creek Park, and I guess the secondary point to that was, I mean, if it turns out with the conversations with the county, if it makes sense for them to just go ahead and plug up their side of the pipe, that may take care of the factor of like splitting our water from their water. If our channel just runs straight from the College Johns all the way down to CSX, maybe it could be something like this. And my impression was Mrs. Silverman was amenable to something like that to kind of like just be able to funnel that water down and go past. If that could solve
I
a
talked
couple
with Josh
problems.
about that as
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
and again, they don't really have the issue concern with that flooding area.
Mhm.
What Josh's concern is that the junction box is not handling all the water. The junction
Josh.
box by the train track as well.
So Josh is he's the farthest one out, right? Okay.
Yeah, it's actually his property, but the pipes are on, but there's easements. The county can come in and pretty much do what they want in that area. Sometimes they work with the residents, sometimes they don't. But to plug that pipe you're suggesting, Stephen, the water might be squirting out of the curbing, but just uphill.
Maybe,
And
yeah,
again,
if it's possible.
That's the
Yeah.
county's problem, it's not our
I mean,
problem.
we
just
can
one way.
advocate for, Josh and for Bridget, but it really won't be our effort.
Yeah, county has to weigh in on that, so. It's
Well, it is
very
their
odd.
county, it's the county.
Yeah, it's very odd down there how that all ends up. There's like actually a gap in between, apparently in between the streets, which is on their property. It's like a pizza-shaped property. So their outbuilding is on that separate
pie?
pizza shape. Yeah,
Yeah, he is a shed,
yeah.
yeah.
So it's
And
odd.
he pays taxes
I know.
to
Yeah.
Garrett Park.
Yeah, you were saying when we were out there. So, but part of his house is in Garrett Park too.
Is the house, I thought it was just.
Yeah, just this little wedge of it is on Garrett Park.
So what is the planned timing for meeting with the county about the north side of the bike path issue?
There's a meeting tomorrow, actually. Andrea sent out, is it tomorrow, Andrea?
Yeah, 2:30.
Hans was on the email, myself,
And then the neighbors.
George, I think, the neighbors, Kathy,
Bridget.
Josh.
Great, glad to hear that.
Thank you.
And that's with Kevin.
Is there we good to move on now?
No, I
Any-
have some comments on this. I've been involved in 3 stormwater management projects in town. And despite all of our best intentions, and despite the fact that we had engineering studies done, every one of them at some level failed because we didn't look holistically at the problem. And we solved the problem for the Cala-John Whitesides and moved the problem downstream to the Heinsons and the Rouse. I am so pleased to hear you say, Bob, that you want to see the details, because I think one of the things that's missing here is an overview from the town engineer who can explain to us with what level of certainty he's proposing what feature where. We need to be able to look at each other's look each other in the eye and say, this will solve the problem with as much certainty as we can. Nothing is perfect, nothing is bulletproof, but we should have the level of commitment. And I'm a strong believer in the fact that if you hire an engineer for the town, you need to hear and listen to him or her with their plans and their ideas and trust them, rather than coming by and in some ways second guessing because it may be too expensive or something. And my feeling is, I'm sitting here as a citizen spending your money on private land to correct the problem that the town or developers created for us. And I don't like that position. I want to make sure that spending your money to solve a problem that we've created for you, get it right. And if it costs us more money, we should listen to the engineer and say, that's what we need to do. And I was on the task force. There wasn't always unanimous consent. I had several points along the way where I said, I don't think this is appropriate. And I'm afraid that we're going to walk into that same trap. I think what we need to do, and this is a council responsibility, the council has the authority to build infrastructure, the council has the authority to spend money and to raise the money to spend for a project. That's a council responsibility. And it's my sense, in this case, in the 2 cases, but particularly in the Rokeby and Kenilworth case, that is a very complex set of problems down there, and it has more than one participant in the solution. It's us and the county. We have yet to talk to the county about this, and I don't see any reason why we shouldn't involve the county in coming up with a plan, because the county needs to buy in on their responsibility on this, and if they are part of the solution, then they get to pay part of the tab, and I think it's critically important that we let them do that. And we have wasted a year and a half without talking to the county. And I think that's inexcusable. We should be talking to the county engineering staff. They've volunteered to help. We've directed the town engineer to be involved in that, and he was told not to, okay? We want to go it alone, and I think that's a huge mistake. This is not a problem that's unique to Garrett Park. It's a problem that's shared. Excuse me, I didn't interrupt. No, Bernie Sanders goes like this. Anyway, I think this is what, if I can visualize the next 6 months, I would strongly urge that when Jason gets ready with his next drawing, iteration of a drawing for not just what happens to your house, Kennedy, not just what happens to your house, Bob, but to the whole floodplain there, and come up with a plan on the basis of which we can say, this is a good solution for the entire problem, not just a portion of it, because we'll just, if we're not careful, we'll just move the problem downfield, and it's somebody else's yard is going to be washed out. And I don't think that's appropriate. And so I would strongly urge that this council exercise its right to have the next iteration of a meeting with Jason Azar and talk to him, have him make a presentation, and it doesn't have to be at a council meeting. It probably would be better not at a council meeting, have a special meeting. I think this is a big enough problem that we should actually spend time on it so that we have a chance to ask Jason and his staff what is the right and the best solution based on the projections for the increased number of storms and the increased intensity of storms that we should anticipate. Don't build it for yesterday, build it for 20 years from now. Just a minute, just a minute.
Let me have, would you please take the mic?
Wait a minute.
Could we let Kennedy get in,
I'm not
please?
finished. I'm not fin-
I'm giving the floor to Kennedy. Kennedy,
Excuse
please.
me, I'm in the middle of a
I
discussion.
think there was a pause. Kennedy, please take the mic. We don't need to
I
have
think
a
I have been in endless discussions here, and the mayor that came into my house and took my signature for right of the way is sitting here, and I'm disgusted and frustrated with this town and the council. You have a delusion of grandeur, you call yourself nuclear-free zone, this zone, that zone. My backyard is flooded. I have fixed my backyard fence 2 or 3 times. My air conditioning, I have lifted it up with personal expense. So next time the kind of fence breaks, the town is willing to pay for it. Or if my basement floods, town is willing to pay for it. Each time you guys are diverting water into my backyard, you didn't have this analysis, paralysis by analysis. I speak with a different accent. My house is getting flooded. You don't care because I don't belong to you. That's how I feel. I feel frustrated and insulted and humiliated in this town. Nobody seems to care. The previous 2 mayors practically ignored my pleadings. The previous town council and whosoever was here was completely ignorant or indifferent to our problems until I brought in Bob and Ruth into the discussion. The town council and the mayors didn't even bother responding to my emails and pleadings. I am really insulted and humiliated. You are again creating problems just because you don't like me.
I'm sorry to hear
I'm sorry, what I was trying to say, Kennedy, if you heard what I said, maybe I didn't say it correctly. I want to be able to look you in the face and say, we can solve this problem, but we need to be practical and we need to be logical. And doing what we've done in the past to so quickly put something in place is only going to make your backyard worse. It's not going to help. We need to figure out where the stream bed needs to run so as to completely avoid your backyard. And I think there are solutions. And those are the kinds of discussions I want to have with the engineer. And it's not that we don't want to find a solution. I'm begging you to give us a chance to come up with the right solution so we don't have to do this again next year. I hear what
You
you
were
said.
in the town council, you were in the task force which created the problem. You have no right to obstruct it from being implemented today.
As I said,
Ruth,
and I don't wish to get into a shouting match, as I said, I own up to the fact that we didn't do a good job of looking at the problem in a holistic way, the way we need to, and I beg for the opportunity to make sure that we get it right this time. That's all I'm saying.
This town council does not care about its residents.
I don't think
One, just point of order, as the mayor and the chair of the town council meeting. Hans, we've heard your point. Thank you. We've got that. Kennedy, we've heard yours. Chuck, you wanted to say something, and then I want to yield the floor to, if the Heinsons or Ruth, you had something to say. I saw a hand. So Chuck, please
So let me
first.
respond to Hans at a number of points that you made. First, you said a holistic study. The drainage study that Jason Azier did looked at the entire watershed that leads to that area. So if you did any other holistic studies, more studies somewhere else, that water drains somewhere else. As I said to Mr. Vasquez, the neighbor next door, there's not much opportunity to do things upstream of this area because 90+% of the property is private property that is owned by residents in town, and some of the adjacent subdivision. Other than that, we have the road right of way, and the road right of way has pavement in more than half of it and green space. So there's not a lot of opportunity to
to try to mitigate the stormwater that's coming to that area. However, I do think it's prudent to address the erosion control. And you say, Hans, to do what the engineer says. If we took that approach, nobody would ever go and get a second opinion from a doctor. Dick Pratt, who's an engineer, ran as a transportation engineer, supported, when we sat right here in the room, you were at the meeting, he supported what John King recommended, $50,000 worth of spot sediment erosion control. George Miller, well, he wasn't necessarily on the committee, ad hoc member. And there was one other person, myself, John King, Dick Pratt, they supported that. What's her name wasn't there? I can't think of her name. Donna was not at the meeting. And the residents supported that. You've had the opportunity, Hans, to support it. I didn't necessarily thought you were a task force member. When I said unanimous consensus, I thought typically the council members are liaisons to the committees. So if that's the case, it's unanimous consensus by the task force, unanimous consensus by the residents in that area to address the complaints, to address the issues. I agree typically, you want to look and see how we can address what's been going on in the whole area so we don't continue to have problems. But a study was done, a year and a half has gone by since last summer. How much more study do we need? How many more times do we look at it? To just say we're going to listen to Jason Alzier, I feel personally offended that you don't want to take my opinion as a civil engineer with concentration in environmental. I worked at the EPA headquarters for 2 years. I worked for a land development engineering firm in the 1980s and 1990s. I did the same TR55 analysis with the data. You take the longest path flow, you take the drainage area that in Boy Scouts you determine the drainage area. There's a merit badge for that. So I've done what Jason has done. I don't agree with his very typical engineering approach to put in a large riprap project. Okay, so we have a professional difference of opinion. And the cost for all that. Now, granted, the cost is one thing. If it's prudent to do a large-scale area, fine, but you keep bringing up the cost. You've had plenty of opportunity during the meetings to address the meeting minutes that I've sent out. I haven't seen any response other than one or two times. You were able to come, you didn't respond about coming to the meeting in Rotary. So you've had an opportunity at the meetings to put your comments in. You have, and the consensus, the majority consensus is to do what we propose. Granted, you're welcome to your opinion. You can share that with the council. The council can put $1 million worth of work in there.
Okay.
They can put $10,000 worth of work in there. But this is what the task force has come up with. Bruce?
Did you want to speak? And I just want to remind everybody about the time.
Yeah, well,
Not personally to you, just saying in general.
I would like to get something out of this, because I have to tell you, Hans, all due respect, within 6 months after that was completed, within the time it was completed, I had told Peter Benjamin had been in my yard, poor Gene was in my yard so many times. He always came out when I showed him. This has been going on since 2014. We could see that what was going to happen with this. I've seen Panetti's property get lower and lower and lower. I'm done with it. I have done plantings. I have tried to do things to suck up water to try to keep it from going on my neighbor. I can't do it. But I think what we talked about will alleviate, for us, it's the intensity of that water coming through that pipe that is just eroding away the stuff. We can't wait another year. I mean, I've had it. I've been doing this since 2014, and I was told by Peter Benjamin, well, it's working just the way it's supposed to, the water's going through it. And it just, it was like nobody listened to me. And now you see what's happened. I'm done with it. We need to get something moving on this, and that's my opinion.
All right, thank you, Ruth. I'd like to make one more comment. I think Chuck actually had mentioned this, and maybe the task force members had talked about it, and I thought it was a great idea. It's worth mentioning again, Chuck. If I got it wrong, you correct me. But we've all said that if it takes a few more years where we need to put more riprap in, we'll have that option, and it still won't cost us, because I thought it was a pipe that was continuing from Calajones all the way to the bike path, and then another pipe, that would be up to 250,000, and then another pipe, not riprap we're talking about, we're talking pipe, from the bike path all the way to the train tracks. That was a total of 350,000. So being able to do this targeted riprap to mitigate, erosion in specific areas, is so much more practical, feasible, and if in a couple more years we find, there's a few other places along that creek bed that we still need to, shore up with riprap, we can bring that in, and we're not going to the bank for $350,000.
And to put a pipe in that area, or a large channel of riprap, as the engineer proposed, you've got a large-scale project, I'm repeating myself, but I think it's helpful to keep that in mind. Small spot areas versus what the engineer said. We're talking about a large-scale project that happened over here for over a half year, and deforestation in that area.
All right.
It's the residents of Belmont. They would rather take this measured approach and see how that works. And like they've done at Rock Creek, you don't see them putting in that large concrete stone in loose. Well, they do spot lately what they did.
Yeah.
Across the train track from us, they've done the same thing.
That's right,
They have step ponds.
Yes.
Now, that's a different type of swale. That's a wet swale. It's continuing wet. So they did spot riprap in there, not large scale as Jason proposed.
I think we have that coming in Porcupine Woods too, that outfall, I think is supposed to have those little steps in it eventually, so. We just need to
Okay.
keep the momentum and
I
make
just
sure we
want-
get it.
I want to be mindful of the time. Jerry,
Yeah, I
you want to say
understand.
something?
Yeah, I just want to understand what the process from here on is, though, for both the the riprap project and the Claremont. What happens next?
Well,
Andrew, may speak to that? Sure.
Yeah, we have open work orders, or we have two separate work orders with Clark Azar for this. So we have a work order on Rokeby, we have a work order on Claremont. So we finished phase 1 of each of those work orders, and we're moving into phase 2, and as needed, phase 3. Jason is good about, we don't always spend up to the limit for every work order, like maybe you do with certain contractors. He's not that way with us, so we'll spend up to what's needed. We're in, regular communication with him about next steps, so we're not overdoing it in terms of what kind of deliverables that we need. But within those work orders, there's specific deliverables that are listed. So this was sort of the very brief memo that he sent today was just to sort of encapsulate confirming what we had talked about with him on the phone last week, just to give a little bit of a cost range associated with that. So from here, there'll be more specifics associated with that. So I think drawings we talked about.
Yeah. There'll be concept drawings for the Rokeby area. We'll get true construction drawings, a survey and construction drawings for Claremont, right?
And the
So-
surveyor, the property owner at Claremont already gave permission for a surveyor to come out. That
And the
letter went
easement,
out last
yeah.
week to Clark Azar, so that the surveyor could come out and start that process as well, so.
And
So
what's
we don't
the-
have an exact timeline because there's a lot of scheduling going on with, different folks and stuff and people's time,
Right.
they don't work full-time for us, so they're working us into their schedules.
There are ongoing work orders to get the design work done that would get us to an RFP.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and it depends on what the cost is will dictate what type of solicitation it will be. As you know, probably.
So at that point, after the drawings are done, then it's back to the council because it's over a certain amount, and you all can get thumbs up or down to it. Do a whole more study for another year, or, like I said, $1 million project or $10,000 project, but that's where the task force has been going, based on the unanimous consensus of the task force and the residents.
Just to clarify, I don't think anybody here suggested doing more study for a year. I think the only concern, well, I didn't read it that way.
I heard the whole
No, I didn't hear it said
study of the area.
No. Chuck, don't put words in my
Well,
mouth.
that's what I heard.
Excuse me. I simply said we need a holistic view as opposed to a local view. And that's what Clark Azar has been working on. What I'm hoping to do is that we would have a meeting with Clark Azar at the time that he finishes with his next rendition of the drawing. And the town council get a chance to ask him about the project and his level of assurance that this solves the problem in the aggregate. Rather than piecemeal, solve the problem in the aggregate.
Nobody can guarantee you that you will be alive tomorrow. Nobody can guarantee you that anything works 100%. I still hold a job, I'm working, I'm not retired and I'm not collecting pension here. So every day I take consequential decisions. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong, but I take it with the best evidence in front of me. You have to weigh risks and benefits and take a decision. You guys, as a council, have to learn to work, because what is happening here in this town, I have been in Parkside for since 1995, and I moved to Garrett Park in 2002 or 3. There is continuous paralysis by analysis in this town. You guys can never take a decision. Everybody puts some poison pill and derails everything. That's what I have seen here. This is very frustrating to live in this town and see what is going on here, despite all the friends I have and all the community participation that I kind of enjoy. I think we need to move on and learn to work with taking risk-benefit into assessment, and that is what we do at work, at my job every day. There are decisions sometimes you take, you may kill an individual person also, and we take those decisions. We don't shy away from decisions and sit tight thinking, oh my God, I need a holistic approach. That way the whole world will come to a standstill if you want a holistic approach.
And Kennedy, as the chairman for the task force, I hope I did that with you all, at least. We had open meetings. I sent out meeting minutes to the task force, and we worked until we got unanimous consensus by the task force.
Thank you. So I, as the mayor, organized this task force. This is a mayor's task force for stormwater management. And what I'm expecting to see is the concept drawings or schematics from Jason Azar, Clark Azar Engineers, and getting the, reviewing that with the task force and the residents that are affected by this stormwater. And then, once we get a sense of the specs and what we need to put out for bid, we'll find out that, and we will certainly bring that to the council for approval up and down. That's how I envision this going. To Kennedi's point, the Heinzen's point, we don't have to beat this to death. We're never going to get 100% assurance, but I do think that in the very brief proposal that we got from Jason Azar, he actually said he recommends this this attack or method, and it will mitigate. We're not asking him to say 100%. I don't think he said 100%, but he gave assurance that this is his recommendation to mitigate the erosion, sediment erosion. So,
Yeah. Can't guarantee it, so.
yeah,
Right.
I mean, I think, your point's well taken, Hans. We need to be looking at things more holistically, but it's not at the impediment and risk of slowing down something that we've already got unanimous decision on here, consensus.
I will say one thing. It would be interesting to have Jason come to the meeting, given the total difference between the two approaches, just to
We fail our job if we don't.
You don't fail
Right.
your job. This is,
to have, well, I would rather have him, because I would be interested as to why it is that we're so different. I mean, I understand one's the erosion control, and one seems to be more than that.
right.
And I would like to know what the risk was between the two. I mean, personally, I'm in favor with continuing on, because at least I was going to ask Chuck, and I'm glad you came back up, because I wanted to ask you, it appears that what goes on upstream of the bike path, while it is influenced by stuff going on downstream of the bike path, is kind of independent. I mean, you can do the work that we just talked about with the spot erosion control and so on, but it's not necessarily influenced totally by what goes on downstream.
Agreed,
Right.
correct. That's
Right.
why it seems like such a viable project. Now, why Jason has an opinion to do it one way, piping or large-scale riprap, that's what land development engineering firms do. That is the typical approach. Occasionally they do other approaches, like in the Beach Drive, but there are a lot of standard details that they're used to submitting to the Department of Transportation, okay? And they're going to look for the standard swale details. There's a book they go to, they Xerox them, they put them on the back page of the large construction drawing sheets. it's nice to work in a town like this where you can take spot, you can address smaller issues and don't have to be forced to do things by the cookie cutter approaches that the county often does. Because land level engineers like Azir Clark are doing it the way the standard county details often are. But we are able to take a little bit of a different approach here. Now, in terms of the engineer that did the work on Donna Calazon's property, as I said before, you know, had I worked with a firm designing that, we might have done the same thing and put in a piping like that. I don't think they anticipated having as much erosion control downstream. Otherwise, they would have put that on the drawings, I feel. They would have recommended that. They don't have any skin in the game in terms of doing less work. I mean, unless someone told them, only do it on their property. So.
And, you know, Phil, I don't think you were there, I'm not sure how many people were there, but we did have a you know, very in-depth presentation by Jason when he was presenting these different strategies, these proposals. One of them was the $250,000 one that piped all the way from Calajon down to the bike path. The other one was from Calajones all the way over to the junction box at the train station, and that was train tracks, and that was $350,000. Like Chuck says, it was sort of like, you know, a 0 to 100% proposition. I don't think at the time, we certainly didn't have conversations with the residents, which is why I asked to form this, to have the task force look at these proposals and look at, you know, how realistic and how valid are they, and also work with the residents, because I wanted to know what the residents thought as well. We knew what this kind of work would involve if it was piping all the way from Calajones to the train tracks. So that's what happened.
The last meeting we had was a 2-hour meeting down at the end of Road B, and I'm glad 2 of the council members came. Gerald Lee and Stephen came. We were 2 hours with the residents, Dick Pratt. It was a large group of people there. And that was the consensus to come up with the spot riprap. And the other driver for this as to why probably not going with what you all somewhat asked, why don't we do what the engineer says? Well, because the residents are not looking for a large-scale deforestation to put in the standard details that engineers often do. And I think it's helpful to keep that in mind when we sit here and say, why don't we do what the engineer wants?
Well, I guess what I'm looking at is that we could do this work the way you've proposed doing it, and I believe it would be fine. But if it turns out that it's not working, then we may have to do some more work downstream. But it wouldn't undo what we did.
What work we do downstream is not relevant to what we do.
That's part B.
Doesn't impact what we're gonna do upstream in that segment of swellway.
So then that would mean that essentially there should be no reason why we wouldn't want to do the work upstream, because it doesn't have an impact, and so you wouldn't need to actually go to the very expensive proposal. You could go with the spot work, and then if you need to study something else, it would be the downstream stuff. Maybe address that.
The downstream area between the bike path and the county, in my opinion, and the train track, in my opinion, the big portion of the people that should be doing work there is the county.
Right, because the county's dumping the most water.
Their drainage area to that junction box at the train track is much larger, or a much smaller percentage of what we're contributing at that point. Whenever you do these drainage area studies, you pick one spot, okay? And so the spot that Jason picked was at the pipe, at the path, the pedestrian path. The larger spot to address between the path and the train track is to do a drainage area study at the junction box right next to the train track, and you will see the large amount of land, which then equates to water coming into that area that's contributing to the problems in that area.
But it's kind of irrelevant for this particular piece that we're talking about.
Yes, correct.
Can't harm the first part, the second part can't harm it. We just need to keep the momentum to do the second part, because that's the total solution.
Got it. But it does seem beneficial, as Phil and Hans both said, to have the engineer explain those trade-offs when the time comes.
Right. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Chuck, and everybody. I'd like to see if we can move this very quickly. We have one more update from Jerry Lee on composting. It is 20 of 10.
It will be very quick. So we talked about the resident proposal for the town to either subsidize or provide in whole a composting pickup service for residents. And we talked about doing a survey working through GP Can or the Citizens Association, but I wanted to check in with the council and just get a sense. It sounds like it would be possible, and the town does have an ability through its website to conduct the survey as a town instead. So I just wanted to make sure everybody's comfortable with that. Joanne Schmader did a draft survey, put one together, which I can send out to you, which would give us a sense of residents' interest in this kind of service and how comfortable residents are with the town paying for this service on behalf of all residents, when we know that probably not all residents would necessarily use the service. But I would feel more comfortable knowing how much interest is out there. You know, and without that kind of information that we would get from a survey, I wouldn't be comfortable proposing that the town undertake that kind of activity.
Jerry Lee, is there a way we can see the questions of the survey before it goes
Yeah,
out? 'Cause
yeah, we can send that
Just
to
curious,
you.
there are a lot of us who do our own composting, not even
Right.
with a commercial service. We do our own on our
Mhm.
property. So I just wanted to
Yeah, I
see
don't
what
have
those questions
Joanne's
are.
final version yet, but I'll ask her
Could you
to
distribute
send that and we can
Yeah, that'd be
distribute that.
great. In case anybody has some other questions to add to it, maybe,
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
a different way of responding.
Right. I just wanted to check the comfort level of the town conducting the survey as opposed to using one of the committees.
I think we need the numbers anyway, in order to get the company that we hire to give us a quote.
Right, a more
You need,
exact
you need
quote.
the level of participation, that's the potential level of participation for them to give us decent pricing.
Right.
So the survey will serve that purpose.
Okay, so I'll get the survey draft out to everybody to look at,
That'd be great.
and we can move forward with that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks, Jerry Lee. Let's do the town manager's report, and that would be Town Manager Fox.
The February revenues, operations, and capital budgets are at expected levels. The total revenues and expenses are within projections. There were no permits issued since the last town council meeting. In terms of town office and maintenance highlights, 2 new light poles should be installed hopefully by mid-April. We are getting quotes for a new truck. This was approved in the FY20 budget, and as a procurement mechanism, we're taking advantage of group purchasing discounts. That's where we're getting those various quotes, county discount, state discount. This week, starting tomorrow, interviews will be held for the contract parking enforcement officer position. And then, as mentioned, we'll meet with the county tomorrow regarding stormwater. And then 2 important dates, March 30th, here at Town Hall from 7 to 9, will be the second FY21 budget work session. And then May 4th is election day. Okay, that's it from me.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Anybody?
The
Good?
question was about the lights, but they're answered. so.
Okay, yeah. All right, thank you. Without further ado, we are adjourned